Tzedakah is the gift of money or its equivalent. But sometimes that's not what we most need. We can suffer emotional as well as physical poverty. We can be depressed, lonely, close to despair. We may need company or comfort, encouragement or support. These too are human needs, no less real for being untranslatable into the language of politics or economics. And that is what Chesed is about. Emotional support, loving kindness, love as compassion. It's what we mean when we speak of God in Psalm 147 as one who heals the brokenhearted and binds up their wounds. It includes hospitality to the lonely, visiting the sick, comforting the bereaved, raising the spirits of the depressed, helping people through crises in their lives, and making those at the margins feel part of the community. It's tzedakah's other side. Tzedakah is done with material goods, chesed with psychological ones, time and care. Tzedakah is practical support, chesed is emotional support. Tzedakah is a gift of resources, chesed is a gift of the person. Even those who lack the means to give tzedakah can still give chesed. Tzedakah rights wrongs. Chesed humanizes fate. Abraham and Sarah were chosen because of their chesed to others. Ruth became the ancestress of Israel's kings because of her chesed to Naomi. At the heart of the Judaic vision is the dream of a society based on chesed, society with a human face, not one dominated by the competition for wealth or power. Chesed is the mark of a people joined by covenant. Covenant creates society as extended family. It means seeing strangers as if they were our long-lost brothers or sisters. A community based on chesed is a place of grace, where everyone feels honored and everyone is at home.
Good evening, everybody. We have a very, very special guest with us here tonight, somebody who holds a very warm place in my heart, none other than Rabbi Paysach Krohn. And in most areas of the Jewish world, everyone knows that name as soon as they see it. It's synonymous with ArtScroll publications. Rabbi Krohn was one of the founders of ArtScroll, involved literally from the beginning with his first book through ArtScroll being the Bris Milah book, and then the subsequent Maggid series, which now is up to, I've lost count. I need a whole bookshelf here just to hold all the Maggid books. But besides being a noted author, Rabbi Krohn is also a sixth-generation Moyal and one of the most sought-after speakers in the Jewish world. I know myself, I fell in love with Rabbi Krohn both as a writer and a speaker as a young man of 18 years of age. We won't say how long ago that was, but ever since that point, Rabbi Krohn has held a very special place in my heart. And in my first year in yeshiva, I had the opportunity to get to know Rabbi Krohn personally. I spent a Shabbos at his house, and it was the beginning of our personal relationship. And since that point, I have had the privilege of calling him a mentor. And it is just such a privilege to have you here tonight, Rabbi Krohn. Thank you so much. First of all, did I leave anything off the bio that we need to add into the program?
Well, just that I love you so much, and I was always so enamored with you from the very first Shabbos that you came. If you remember, I think you were studying in YU at the time, and I had given a lecture, I think, on Simcha, and that's where I met you first. And we davened Ma'ariv, and I happened to notice how you were davening. I was so moved with your sincerity during that tefillah, and I decided to invite you for Shabbos. And I think you came with Zev Dryesh, if I remember correctly.
Yep.
His father, Olav Shalom, was a friend of mine, and I asked him if you could come along. And you both were at my home for Shabbos, and that was when you read to me your magnificent speech that you gave at Aleph as your parting words, and how you were inspiring those to become more connected to Judaism, to Yiddishkeit. And I just felt that Klal Yisrael would hear from you. And of course, the rest is history. All the wonderful places you've been and everything that you've accomplished. The only thing that I would just correct a drop is that ArtScroll actually started in 1976, and my first book was printed in the mid-1980s. I was so enamored by ArtScroll, I wanted to be part of it, and I had known Meir Zlotowitz from camp. He was a few years older than I was, but when he started writing, and he was very friendly with Rabbi David Cohen, who is my Rebbe, and I had met him not only in camp, but at Rabbi David's home many times. And I said to him that I would like to write for you. And at that time, they had started with Megillas Esther, if you remember, in 1976, and they sold close to 90,000 copies because it was written so brilliantly and it was set out so magnificently. And it had this overview by Rabbi Nosson Sherman that everybody was just enamored with it. And I thought that I perhaps would write one of the 5 Megillas. And they said, no, the 5 Megillas are all covered. They're going to take care of Kehelas, and they're going to take care of Rus and Eicha and Sheashirim. And they had just done Megillas Esther. So I offered to do for them Mishlei. And they said, go ahead, you write it. And that's Proverbs. And, we'll edit it. And that was probably one of the dumbest things that I ever did in my life, because Mishlei is not a storyline. Every sentence is a book in itself. Every sentence has so many thoughts. And it just overtook me. I just couldn't do it. And I felt very bad about it. I had gone to the 42nd Street Library. I took out about 10 different svarim from the library, the secular library. They had all the Hebrew books there. And I saw it was just overwhelming. I just couldn't do it. And then finally, a year or two later, I thought when they came out with topics, they were writing on Shema and on Kaddish, I said, you know what? I could write for them on Bris Milah, because at that time already, I had started when my father passed away in 1966. I was a mile already now for 13, 14 years. And I said to them, look, nobody could write it better than me, because I can tell you all the customs, I can tell you the laws, I can tell you the practical aspects. And they said, okay, write a chapter and let's see. And my mother and I, my mother was really the one who taught me writing, and we wrote a chapter. We took part of the tefillahs, part of the prayers, and we presented it. And I will never, ever forget this. When I presented it, they told me to come back in a week or two. Both Rabbi Nosson Sherman and Rabbi Meir Zlotowitz said that I should come back and I would get from them, whether they wanted it or not. And I'll never forget, we were sitting in Rabbi Sherman's office on Coney Island Avenue in Brooklyn, and he said, we like it very much. And he took out his telephone book and he put my name and telephone number in his telephone book, if you remember what a telephone book is. And he put it in his vest pocket. And to me, that was so symbolic that it was near his heart. And he said to me, now you're one of us. And that was so magnificent. And it took 2.5 years to write the book. And eventually, when the book came out, I was wondering, it was really a wonderful, thank God, a great accomplishment as a male. I could say to people, I wrote the book. And then, that I was very close to the Maggid of Yerushalayim, the Maggid of Jerusalem. Maggid means a storyteller. And he had come to America many years before and had stayed in my parents' home. And I thought that would be a great idea to write his stories. And I approached him and I said, listen, Rabbi Schwadron, you're a great storyteller and every story has a lesson. But the American public, the boys and the girls, they don't speak Yiddish and they don't speak Hebrew. So let me do your stories in English. And he thought that was a good idea. And that's what happened. I wrote it in English and somebody would translate it for him. And slowly but surely, there were some stories he said, wow, you interpreted this story way different than I did, but that's beautiful. And sometimes he would write me, he says, you don't know what you're talking about. And, that story has a totally different lesson. And that's why if you look at all the Maggid books, the story has one typeface and the lesson has a different typeface, because that's how it was in the first book. The story was his, but the lessons were mine. Mm-hmm. And Baruch Hashem had sold so many, also couldn't get over it. They said, okay, now you got to write a second one. I said, where am I going to get the stories from? I took all his best stories. They said, well, listen, Rabbi Sherman said to me, I was just in South Africa, and the Rebbe was learning with the class. He was learning your stories. He was reading your stories. That means you have a responsibility. If you can write a story and kids and adults will be inspired by it, you got to find more stories. So that's why the second book is called Around the Maggid's Table. In other words, when you sit around the Maggid's table, the Maggid tells some stories and other people tell stories. And that's how it started. Then I started asking other rabbis and other people that were involved in public involvements. And I started getting stories. And then by the time the third book came out, they were all my own stories that I had picked up all over. And now, Baruch Hashem, a million times over, there are 9 Maggid books and 3 books on speeches. And one of the books is also on the topic that you and I are going to speak about. It's called The Glittering World of Chesed. And of course, Chesed means thinking about others. When I was 21, my father passed away. I'm the oldest of 7 children. My father, unfortunately, was sick. When you're 21 and you got to support your mother and younger brothers and sisters, it's not easy. So one day, a man in our shul, his name was Mr. Chaim Israel. He came over to me and he said, here's an envelope for you and your mother. I said, what is this? He said, I know that you could use it. I said, we're not beggars. We're not poor. We don't need any money. He said, no, this is not charity. This is a loan. So I said, so when do we have to pay it back? He said, I will never ask you for it. Whenever you want, you could pay me back. I said, okay, fine. I got to ask my mother. I wasn't married at the time. I was still living at home. I said to my mother, Mom, Mr. Israel gave us money. She said, well, we're not poor. We don't need tzedakah. I said, no, Ma, he said it's a loan. She said, when do we have to pay it back? He said, he'll never ask us, whenever we want. Okay, we really did need the money, and it was helpful. It was about $1,500, and this goes back to the year 1967. So now, 2 years later, I was 23. More people were taking me. I put together the money, and I go to Mr. Israel. And I give him back the money. And he says, I'm not taking it. I said, Mr. Israel, what are you talking about? You're the one who told me it's a loan. I want to pay it back. He said, of course it's a loan. He said, but let me explain. He said, do you remember many years ago when I went bankrupt? That's what he was talking about. Now, of course, I remember the whole shul was going crazy. He was a wealthy man, and overnight he lost everything. He said, a few weeks after I went bankrupt, there was another man in our neighborhood, Mr. Lewenstein, who came over to me, Moshe Lewenstein, and he gave me money. And I said to him, I'm not poor. He said, no, this is a loan. So I said, when do I pay it back? He said, I'll never ask you. Whenever you want, you pay it back. And a few years later, I came back to Mr. Lewenstein, Mr. Israel was telling me, and I gave him the money, and he said, I'm not taking it. So I said to him, what you said to me? What do you mean I'm taking it? You said it's a loan. He said, yes, it's a loan. And you have to pay, but not me. Someday you're going to find another family that needs the money, and you give them the money. That's how you pay me back. And when they come to pay you, you'll tell them the same thing I'm telling you. They give it to another family. And that's exactly what my mother and I did. That's chesed. That's chesed when you're not thinking only about yourself. When we broach the topic of chesed, we have to know something that Rabbi Chaim Volozhiner once said. Rabbi Chaim Volozhiner, who was the student of the Vilna Gaon, he wrote a book called Nefesh HaChaim, The Soul of Life. And in the introduction, his son wrote about his father. My father always used to tell me these 3 words, and I'll say it in Hebrew, and of course I'll translate. Loi la'atzmai nivra. You were not created for yourself. God did not give you your talent so that you should become rich and famous. God gave you the talents that you should think of others. That's really what life is all about. Each one of us is blessed with certain talents, and I don't have to be like you. You don't have to be like me, and both of us don't have to be like the third person. Everybody's got their own talents, but what God wants from each of us is to fulfill our potential and leave this world a better place. And the way I think that you can leave this world a better place, one of the ways is by doing for others. And I'll tell you something very interesting, and I always mention this in my lectures. The Chavetz Chaim once said there are two things that every person must do every single day of his life, men and women. One, to learn Torah. Every person has to learn some Torah every day. It could be Chumash, it could be Tehillim, Psalms, it could be Halacha, which are the laws, Gemara. You got to learn something. And the second thing he said, every day you have to do a chesed, you have to do a favor for somebody else. Now, I always say, it doesn't mean husbands for wives, wives for husbands. That you got to do if you know what's good for you. I'm talking about out of the house. And then people say, well, doesn't charity begin at home? Yeah, I know, but you don't become a greater person because you bring your wife flowers or because a wife brings a husband coffee. I mean, that's part of natural life. But what's beautiful is when somebody is thinking, what can I do for somebody else? And I think that every person, and that's what I write about in this book, every person should have a chesed planner. And that's what I would say. On those 10 steps that you're talking about, one of the 10 steps should be, in the chesed aspect, that keep a notebook. Write one chesed that you did every day. Don't write down 10, because there's some days you can't do 10. You can't even do 3. And then you're going to feel bad. Oh, this day I didn't do it. Just write down 1, even if you did 10. And I'm telling you, 2 things will happen. 1, your life will change to the better, because David HaMelech writes, Hashem tzilcha, God is your shadow. And just like you do for others, Hashem will do for you. That's the first thing. And second thing, that book will become one of your most treasured possessions. You will not be able to go to sleep at night until you filled in something that you did for somebody else. And I'll tell you the truth, I try to do that. And I've spoken to it to my children and grandchildren and many, many speeches. Keep that notebook. That's a focus of what a Baal Chesed is.
Wow. That's beautiful. And I remember the first time I heard that idea from you back in 19 that you at that point actually sold a Chesed notebook that people could get. You had a nice introduction, and it was a calendar. And
right.
I remember getting that book and taking it with me to Eretz Yisrael when I went to study in Israel.
Right.
And I still remember sitting in the Or Sameach dormitory, which isn't the nicest place on earth, but it works, you know. And I would every night I had it on the shelf right above my bed, and I would grab it, I'd write something down. And as someone who followed your example back in the 90s and did this, it definitely groomed me and got my mind thinking on how to be an ish chesed, how to be a person of kindness. So that's a beautiful idea. That's a beautiful idea.
And I'll tell you something. I'll give you some ideas. You know, in this book that I wrote, you find such incredible people, regular guys like me and you. I'll give you a small example. There's a fellow in the shul. He doesn't want to mention his name. And then, of course, in the book, I didn't mention his name. But I used to speak in that synagogue, you know, before COVID. I used to go there every 6 months. There was a Thursday night session every Thursday night. They have a different rabbi. But every 6 months, I was called back to speak. And I would daven Ma'ariv there. And it just happened to be one night when I was davening Ma'ariv, I noticed the podium that this fellow had was a very, very big podium, much different than anybody else in the shul. And, you know, I lifted up the top of the podium. He had 16 sections in there. I couldn't believe it. I started looking, what has he got? He's got Band-Aids. I made a list of what he had in there. He had Tums, Scotch tape. You know, imagine if your sitter rips, right? If you don't scotch it up right away, you know, the rest of the page is going to rip. He had Tums, aspirin, Motrin, just all these unbelievable things. Anybody in the shul who needed it could come to him. He had hard candies for the kids, lollipops or whatever. So you could take anything. He even had a black marker in case your tefillin were not black enough and the straps had to be, repainted. So, that's something anybody can do that. Who thinks of that? I'll tell you, there are some fabulous singers and musicians. Now, some of your audience may know these names, Mordechai Ben David, Avram Friedman, Shlomi Dax. And, they get thousands of dollars when they perform. But if they know a child is sick in a hospital, or if they know a child is sick at home, they'll go for free and perform in that child's home. Is that a great chesed? That's unbelievable. God gives these guys a talent, and they are so kind and so giving of themselves. It's just unbelievable.
That is unbelievable. And there's here in Cleveland a name that everyone knows. I'm sure you know the name as well, and I'm sure I wouldn't be surprised if he's made it into some of your books or speeches. But none other than Mendy Klein, Zichron Levracha. So Mendy, who was the one who brought me to Cleveland, and very close with him. We miss him dearly and constantly, but one of his big focuses was not only building Torah in Cleveland, but building Chesed in Cleveland. And he insisted in Cleveland having Chesed organizations like big East Coast cities. So, and one example here is we have a Bikur Cholim here in Cleveland that is I can't say it's quite like Satmar Bikur Cholim, but it's paramount to what you have in New York and paramount to what you have in the East Coast. It's in all the hospitals with the hospitality rooms, with the making meals for patients. And it's a Cleveland clinic. It's a hospital that people come from all over the country, all over the world to come to. And Mendy said that the Cleveland has to have Chesed. We have to have the best Torah and we have to have the best Chesed. And
I'll tell you a story about me and Mendy Klein. Now, I used to see him sometimes that I go to conventions or Torah Masorah conventions. Never, ever did he get honors. He wouldn't take any honors and he would never sat up front or anything like that. I wrote him a letter. There's a dear friend of mine who has a grandchild in Israel that Nebuch had to have his legs amputated. He had many, many problems. He walks with a prosthesis. And of course, because it's a little child, every 6 months or every year, they have to give him a different prosthesis. And he has fingers missing on his hand and he has a lot of problems. And they have tremendous amount of bills. Now, the family asked me if I could raise some money for them. I mean, the amount of money that they needed for the bills per year was just astronomical. So I had heard just what you said about Mendy Klein, that he was so involved in Bikur Cholim and so involved in helping people. I took a chance. What could I lose? So I sent them a letter and I did not even think that I would get a response. And I sent them a copy of the bills. I said, listen, you don't have to send the money to me. You could send it to the family direct. The grandparents are in Amsterdam, but the parents are in Israel. And he sent me a $5,000 check. He wanted to see the rest of the bills. And then he wrote me, just continue all the good work you're doing. I didn't even know he knows who I am. And then unfortunately, the next year he passed away, but his family has continued, helping us every year. It's just a wonderful, wonderful day. He's a paragon of Chesed, no question about it.
Yeah, and Torah and Chesed, and that's really, for many of our listeners here tonight are local Cleveland students, even though we have people from all over the country and the world participate in this program, but for Clevelanders, we could sometimes take it for granted because we see an amazing Bikur Cholim and an amazing Chaverim and all these wonderful things. But go to another community of 80,000 Jews that has what we have as far as Chesed, and you're not going to find it. And it's right. Like you said, it's from Mendy, who insisted in that being here. So see, along these lines, we mentioned some amazing people. We mentioned the man in the synagogue in New York. We mentioned Mendy, Zichron Levracha. But and I'm sure that this comes up in the book, but the quintessential Ish Chesed, the quintessential person of Chesed, when you think of that question, who is the quintessential person? Who is it? Past, present, future, someone you know personally or someone you don't know? Who is the example of Chesed?
Well, I'll tell you somebody. I can't say that he is, the paragon of Chesed. He's a tremendous tzaddik, as you'll see in a second. And I'll tell you what he and I are involved in. So I know from our mutual involvements, and he does so much more than what we're going to talk about in a second. And that's Rabbi Yaakov Bender. Rabbi Yaakov Bender, you can look him up. He's the principal or the Rosh Yeshiva of Yeshiva Darkei Torah. Mm-hmm. And this guy has a heart of gold, I'm telling you. And he and I have many, many things in common. We both lost our fathers when we were very young. He was even younger than I was. I was 21. I think he was 15. And we both became very, very close to our mothers. Our mothers were very strong influences in our lives. And because I think that we lost fathers at a young age, we became very sensitive to the needs of those who don't have what others have. And he and I are involved in two specific organizations, but he does much more, which I'll tell you in a second. But we're involved in an organization called Links. Now, Links is for teenagers who lost a parent during their teenage years. So this is a group that has today over 1,000 kids. And during COVID, Nebuch, there was so many more that unfortunately joined the organization because either a father or a mother passed away. Now, this Links organization, every year we have a Shabbaton. And what both Rabbi Bender and I do is every Thursday night, he does this, and I do this Thursday afternoon. We record a blessing to these orphans, and they get it. They get his message Thursday night. They get my message Friday afternoon. And these kids, they look forward to it because we know that one of the most beautiful things is when a father or mother blesses a child Friday night. But now these kids, they're without a parent. That one of their parents is missing and they may not get that blessing. So I decided, you know what? I would give an Erev Shabbos bracha. And what happened is that I recorded, and some of the kids, the parents tell me that they don't listen to it. They let it go on their answering machine or on their phone so they can listen 3 or 4 times before Shabbos. It's only a 2-minute blessing, but it means so much to them. So that's one organization we're both involved in. And then there's another organization, again, you should never know from it, but it's called Sister to Sister. And these are single mothers who are divorced or separated, and they take care of their children from age 8 to 18. And in this organization, there's over 2,000 kids. Wow. And this is something, we both go to the Shabbatons, we both speak to the mothers, and we try to give them chizuk. And, so that's something that he's very, very involved in, both of those great organizations. But even more so, and I can't do this because I don't have a school, but his school, Darkei Torah, opened its doors for kids that needed special attention, kids that may have been challenged physically or intellectually. And most schools don't want to take these kids, but he did. And he opened up a school, like a trade school, for some of these kids that they should be able to gain a trade. And he's got a heart of gold. So if you're ever in New York and you ever, as a matter of fact, he's just written a book for Art Scroll called Rabbi Bender on Chumash, just beautiful. And they have an interview with him about it. It's just one. He's a very, very special person to get to know.
Unbelievable. And by the way, just in case anyone who doesn't know Rabbi Krohn personally or his reputation does not precede him to you, you've probably been hiding under a rock, but just in case, for me in many ways, Rabbi Krohn is also an Ish Chesed. And I'm just going to share a story about Rabbi Krohn because I don't think he would share it about himself. But when I was learning in Ner Yisrael, I had a very good friend by the name of Ben Zion Robbins. And it happened to be that just, how we always say it's a small world and it's an even smaller Jewish world. So Ben Zion's sister and my wife, we weren't married at the time, but we're good friends in seminary. And Ben Zion was somebody that everybody loved. And he was also somebody who had or has, I think it's cerebral palsy, if I remember the diagnosis, has cerebral palsy. And Ben Zion was always a young man who persevered. He insisted on using a walker, not a wheelchair, so that he would push himself to work a little bit harder. And, that was Ben Zion. So one day I was driving Ben Zion to a chasna in New York, to a wedding in New York, and he mentions his relationship with Rabbi Krohn. I said, really? I know Rabbi Krohn too. And we get to talking about Rabbi Krohn. And he tells me that Rabbi Krohn has been his pen pal since before his bar mitzvah, and that Rabbi Krohn actually wrote his bar mitzvah speech for him. Because the other point I'm telling you is that besides Ben Zion having cerebral palsy and having his physical ailments, he also lost his father at a young age. And at some point he met Rabbi Krohn before his bar mitzvah, and just exactly what Rabbi Krohn said that he encourages people to do and through an organization, he has done himself. And I heard it firsthand from my friend Ben Zion, who was a beneficiary to that chesed at a time we really needed it, because I know, I have one boy and a ton of girls, but I know that I put a lot of time into that bar mitzvah speech when he gave it, and many fathers do. So Rabbi Krohn, who at that point was already a world-renowned speech orator and speechwriter, he took the time to write this speech, the bar mitzvah speech for this young boy in Baltimore, Maryland, who didn't have a father. And again, I don't know if you tell that story about yourself, but I'm able to tell it about you. And I heard it from firsthand from Ben Zion. And
see, I'll tell you, here's a small thing. It's interesting. You mentioned that I was his pen pal. I had forgotten that. I didn't remember that. I used to write him postcards almost every single day, wherever I was. because he couldn't play ball, obviously, and for many, many years people didn't even think he could get married. He is married, Baruch Hashem, but many people thought he was a loner because he's a very sweet guy, everybody liked him, but I just wanted to make him feel special. So I would send him a couple postcards. I was traveling all over. I would get a picture postcard, just knock out a few sentences. It's not hard for me, and that's what he always felt somebody cared about him.
And wonderful. And then Sister to Sister, amazing organization. First of all, we have women here in Cleveland who we're close with, who are her divorcees and have benefited tremendously from that organization. I believe it was founded by Chani Neuberger, who's now part of the Biden administration.
That's right.
Yeah. So
how do you know Chani Neuberger?
I'm from Baltimore, or I learned in Baltimore.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, she's from Baltimore. Right.
It's I don't know Chani personally, but I know Yehuda, her husband.
Yeah.
And she's doing amazing things in the Biden administration now, and as far as her chesed with Sister to Sister, it's been tremendous.
She's always there with her husband every Shabbaton. That's true.
Yeah, it's a beautiful thing. Yeah. So. Okay, we're here at the Kaisel Maravi for Moshe Abba's first tefillin, for his Nachas tefillin. And we ran into my very close mentor, Rabbi Paysach Krohn, who came in all the way from Kew Gardens, New York, just for that. No, we just ran into him here. But so we're going to get a quick word and bracha from him before Moshe Abba puts on his tefillin.
It comes from a great family and a great father and mother. Now, I remember your father when he was learning in YU, and I saw him daven. I was so inspired by him. I never saw anybody daven like that. And I asked him to come to my house for Shabbos. And he came to my house, and I said to him, one day, Klal Yisrael is going to know about you. And see, I was right. And your father is doing a great job. And I'm sure that the fact that your father took this special effort to bring you to Eretz Yisrael by the Kaisel, that you're so lucky that only when you have a son will you appreciate what your father did for you. And I give you a bracha. They should be a big Talmid Chacham, and they should have the Avos Yisrael that your father has, and that you should have Avos Hashem and Avos HaTorah. And this kesha that you're making, you're righty or lefty?
Right.
Righty. Okay, so the hand, yad, symbolizes, again, things that you do. You should always do great stuff, and your head should always be thinking great stuff, and you should be a pride to your family and to all of Klal Yisrael.
Very good. I want to throw one more question at you before we end with a great story and a great thought, or just wrap up,
Yeah.
So you gave one suggestion about how somebody can become more focused on chesed, of having the chesed notebook, the kindness notebook. But give a strategy for someone who looks at themselves and says, I'm not really a person focused on chesed. I'm not focused on doing kindness and thinking about others, but I want to be that way. I want to be that type of person. What can such a person do who wants to become a person of chesed?
That's a very, very good question, and I'll give you what I think is an appropriate answer. Hashem blesses every single one of us with certain blessings and certain talents. And each one of us knows people that have less than we have. Now, there's some people that even in this COVID situation have to be alone during Shabbosim, or they have to be alone certainly during the holiday of Pesach. Many of you certainly know women, widows that had to be alone. So here is something that some family did. I'll tell you, it's one of the greatest stories that I know. And I just wrote this up recently when I wrote my Haggadah. And, that was in there. It was just absolutely incredible. I think I have it in there. And that is that this happened in Lakewood to a woman, Mrs. Devorah Monk. And she had been living in Borough Park and with her husband. And then she decided to move to Lakewood because all her children and grandchildren were there. This was about 5 years ago. Tragically, her husband got sick and he passed away. So now she was a widow. But she had all her children and grandchildren within 5-10 minutes, of a drive. They all lived in Lakewood. But then when the COVID situation hit, so she knew that she was going to have to be alone at the Seder because children weren't coming to grandparents and grandparents couldn't go to children, even with masks and social distancing. Everybody was keeping away. So her neighbor, and we'll just call them the Beckers, called her and said, listen, you have your dining room window that faces our living room window. We can make our Seder in the living room. We'll move our table into the living room. We'll open up our window. You open up your window. And then we can have the Seder together. You'll be in your house. We'll be in our home. And you don't have to be alone. And she told me, she said to them, you would do that for me? They said, of course. You're like a bubby. You're like a grandma to our children. They love you. So of course we'll do it. And not only that, the husband said to her, let's try it out Shabbos HaGodol, because we don't want to try it out just the first night of Pesach. What if it doesn't work? So Shabbos HaGodol is the Shabbos before Pesach. And they moved their dining table into the living room. They opened up the window. She was able to hear Kiddush, and she was able to hear the Zmiras and the singing and everything. And they knew it would work perfect. She told me Erev Pesach, the Becker family, the children knocked on her door. They didn't come in, and they brought her a Seder plate with the moror and the charosas and the salt water. And she's thinking, this family is unbelievable. Not only are they moving their dining room table into the living room, they're bringing me a Seder plate. Anyhow, the Seder went beautifully. Now it's 1 o'clock in the morning. The Seder is over, and she gets a knock on the door. And she's thinking, my gosh, who's knocking out? Eliyahu Hanavi came already a half hour ago. Who's coming now? And she sees it's her kids. Her kids and her grandchildren walked 20 minutes. They didn't come into the house just to find out. Oma, that's how the German people say, Oma, how was the Seder? She says, how was the Seder? It was fabulous. I said, fabulous? What do you mean fabulous? She says, we're a German family, a Yekisha family. And Daddy always used to sing certain songs, at the Seder. And I couldn't believe it. That family sitting next door, I didn't know they're German people. They sang the same songs Daddy sang. And the son starts laughing. Yehuda starts laughing. So Mrs. Monk she said to him, why are you laughing? He said, Ma, I didn't want to tell you. You see, a couple of days ago, they called me up and they said, could you make a voice recording of all the songs your father used to sing at the Seder? And we will study them. We'll sing them. We'll learn them. So we could sing all these songs for you for your mother at the Seder. And she told me, I didn't even know this, that the German family, they sing Adon Olam, Yigdal, and Ein Kalakeno at the end of the Seder, and that's what that family did. Now, any of us could have thought about that, but nobody did, right? Wow. Didn't we all know people that were alone? And that's how you become a person of chesed. Think about those that don't have what you have. Is somebody alone? Is somebody a widow or widower? And, there's unfortunately a lot of ill health today, and a lot of death, and you got to be there for them. You can't maybe go visit them, but you can call, and you could say, I'm thinking about you. Or if somebody is ill, call them up and say, tell me, what's your name and your mother's name? I want to pray for you. And people who are ill want people to pray for them. And just that call alone, and even the fact that you pray for them. Or if you're in a grocery store, you could call somebody who's alone and say, I'm here anyway. Can I pick up something for you? Try to think of those that have less than you. And I think that's one good way of doing it.
It's unbelievable. Wow. And again, Rabbi Krohn, just to show your influence on chesed, I want to tell you about something. Recently, I had a friend who was in quarantine with COVID, like many of us have had to do over the past number of months. And so I was in touch with him regularly. He's the Balkari in Armenian here, Mordechai Bauman, wonderful younger man, a Rebbe here in Yeshiva Derech HaTorah, one of our schools. So I was in touch with him the whole time that they had COVID and they were in lockdown. Just if I went to the store, I texted, what could I do? And, dropped off groceries a few times, no big deal. So then when he came back to the land of living and came back to the kollel where we daven, he says, how much I owe you for the groceries? And I said to him, and you'll know where I got this from, I said, you don't owe me anything, but make sure that when you have the opportunity to do the same thing for others, you pay it forward.
Let me get your attention for 2 minutes. We all have people that are dependent on us. We have our spouses, we have our children, we have the people we work with, etc., etc. But one thing we can be doing this year is to increase that number of people who are dependent on us, and to take on a partner in Torah, and to take on somebody to learn with, and to give somebody who's not connected to Torah learning the gift of learning Torah. We all know that we're living in unbelievable times with the COVID-19 pandemic. Now we're seeing all of a sudden the United Arab Emirates and Israel making peace. Something is happening in the world, and I think it's clear to each and every single one of us. And we are also the first Jews in over 2,500 years to say that we can see the majority of the world Jewish population living in Israel. Let me share with you another idea that I once heard from Moshe Shapiro Zatzal. He said that the Kodesh Baruch Hu has a complete cheshbon on who is going to be zocheh to be there when Mashiach comes and who is not going to be zocheh. In other words, he knows, is this person going to be able to have a connection? Is this person not going to be able to have a connection? Is this person going to find their way back to a Kodesh Baruch Hu? And is this person not? That is on the cheshbon of a Kodesh Baruch Hu. But a Kodesh Baruch Hu puts in front of us opportunities to help those people get to where they're going to be, just like he puts the opportunities for us to get to where we need to be. And today HaKadosh Baruch Hu is putting before you the opportunity to help a Jew connect with Torah learning, to help a Jew to connect with him. So really we're all like Esther, when Mordechai came to her in the Purim story, and Mordechai said, Im charer techarishi be'es hazos, if you're going to be quiet at this time, Revach v'hatzala yamad la'Yehudim b'makam acher, the salvation is going to come from somebody else, but it's not going to come from you. It's going to be your missed opportunity. HaKadosh Baruch Hu has put an opportunity before you right now to connect with somebody, to learn with somebody, to help somebody find the beauty of Yiddishkeit and the beauty of Limud Torah. I hope you will all join me in becoming a partner in Torah.
One last question before we send you on your way. If somebody gave you a giant billboard, let's say in your neighborhood on the Garden State Parkway, or here in Cleveland on, on whatever it is, Cedar Road, a giant billboard, you could write whatever you wanted on that billboard. What message would you put on that billboard?
I would put a big sign with uppercase letters, think, in a couple dots, and then it would say, of others. Every person has to think. Every human being has to think. But it's not just theory. You have to think of others. That's what chesed is all about.
So, Rabbi Krohn, I want you now, if you can, summarize and end with a great story and a great thought, and then, as all your speeches end, and then we'll wrap it up. So,
okay.
Any parting words for our crowd here tonight?
There is a Hebrew word in Parshas Kisisa, and it talks about giving, and the word is v'nosnu, vav nun taf nun vav, and it's a palindrome. You can read it forwards and backwards. And the Baal HaTurim tells us something amazing. The Baal HaTurim says that the reason that the word "and they shall give" is a palindrome is because when you give of your time and your money and your heart, you're not losing anything. You're going to get it back. Hashem is going to make sure that you get it back. And so what my parting words to your wonderful group tonight is that when you are investing in others, you're really investing in yourself. Because Hashem, God, keeps a scorecard. And he sees that when you do for others, they're going to do for you. And if it's not those people, it'll be somebody else. But everything comes back for the good and chas v'shalom otherwise. And that's why it's so important to do chesed. And I could just end with this fabulous, fabulous story. There was a guy in Flatbush 2 years ago who made a party. And it was called a Suda Seidah, a thank you party. And the reason that he made the thank you party, he called all his friends and family. And he said, I want to thank Hashem. I want to thank God for something special that happened. He said, we have a whole group of chevra here in Brooklyn. And every year we go down to Orlando during the winter break, the four of us with the families, the wives and the kids. And last year, he said, we were all going down to Orlando, and we had this private condominium, and it had a pool and an arcade room. And one morning, the women decided they're going to go shopping. So the men said, you know what, let's take the kids swimming. And we took all the kids swimming. And then after a half hour, we went back inside, and the kids stayed in the basement by the arcade room. And he said, I have an 8-year-old boy. And he noticed that the 2-year-old boy is missing. Now, the 2-year-old boy couldn't follow the arcade games. And the 8-year-old saw that the door to the backyard was open. So instinctively, he ran out and he sees that the 2-year-old boy is flat on his face in the pool. He had gone into the pool and he fell. And he started yelling and screaming. He came into the house. He said, my baby's in the pool. Now, the father who's telling the story says Of the four of us who went down, the four men, only one guy was a Hatzalah member. He was the only guy who knew CPR. And it just happened that God orchestrated that he should be coming downstairs when that kid came running in. He just wanted to check on the kids. Well, when he heard that the kid was in the pool, he ran out there, dragged the kid out of the pool, laid him out on the ground, did CPR, brought him back to life. They called an ambulance and they saved the kid's life.
Wow.
He said, I shouldn't say thank you to Hashem. It could have been any of us who went down there to check on the kids, but none of us knew CPR except him. Now, when he finished speaking, the wife of the guy who did CPR got up and said, now I want to speak. Nobody could believe it. What is she going to say? She said, Rabotai, let me tell you something. She said, me and my husband, the Hatzalah member, we weren't going to go down this year. We had a very rough year in business. We couldn't afford it. Now, I don't know, she said, how that father found out about it. We didn't say anything to anyone. But he called me up and he said, what do you mean you're not coming? We're all like brothers and sisters. We're all family. I'm paying for you and your husband and your 4 kids. And that's what he did. He paid for all of us to come down. Now, when he did that chesed, he thought he was doing us the greatest favor in the world by giving us a vacation. He didn't realize he was doing himself the greatest favor, because the guy he brought down was the Hatzalah guy who saved his son.
Wow.
That's
Wow.
V'nosno. That's V'nosno.
That is unbelievable.
It
Wow.
is unbelievable. And
Well,
that's in that book.
Yeah.
That the
Wow. So,
glittering world of chesed, which you could get at Art Scroll. It's just, it will just elevate you. It'll just elevate you. And right now, I think it's sold out, but you can order it and they'll get it to you on the back order. It's not a problem.
beautiful.
But, you know, I could just tell you from this, when you become a giving person, you feel so good about yourself because you know that you're doing what Hashem wants. Hashem is giving, and if you become giving, Hashem will give you as well.
Beautiful. Wow. Rabbi, I don't know about our students here tonight, but I know that I'm tremendously inspired, and this was, and for me alone, it was worth it to have this. So I want to, from the bottom of my heart, I want to thank you for your time. If anybody wants to get more of Rabbi Krohn is very active on TorahAnytime.com, which you're all familiar with. And as he mentioned, all his books are published by ArtScroll, so you can go to artscroll.com. They're also on Amazon.com. ArtScroll has an Amazon store, so you can find any of the wonderful 9 Maggid books, the Bris Milah book, the book on Chesed. And I'm sure after tonight that if you don't own any Rabbi Krohn books, or if you don't follow him yet on Torah Anytime, you will now, because this was tremendous. Thank you so much, and I can't wait till we do something like this again.
Be my pleasure, Pinchas. I always knew you'd be great. From the first Shabbos you were here, right in this dining room where I'm speaking. You were sitting right there.
Yeah.
Never forget it.
Yeah.
I love you. Regards to the Rebbetzin, to the kids, to your in-laws. Only good.
Thank you, and in regards to everyone over there, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Okay, thank you. First off, I do want to thank everybody for being here tonight. I want to thank you all for participating. I meant what I just said from the bottom of my heart, that I know I was tremendously inspired. I hope that you were as well. And this is now, for those of you who joined us on Zoom as opposed to on Facebook or YouTube or Torah Anytime or the other places being streamed, you get to be picked on by me. You get to be part of the audience participation part of tonight's session. And I want to just throw out a question to the crowd and see if we can get any takers before I start embarrassing. I mean, calling on people. And my question for the crowd is that we mentioned this idea of kindness and v'nosnu, and we mentioned it last week. Also, Rabbi Krohn didn't know that. He didn't watch last week's talk. But the idea of when we give, you end up getting it back. And I want to just start off by sharing with you a story of a businessman who had a very hard time in his business. I mean, he started a business, he had a certain amount of success, but ultimately the business didn't make it, and he lost every penny that he had. And he's sitting there in his house, downtrodden, drowning in his own sorrow. And he realizes that he only has $50 left to his name. Okay, he doesn't have enough money to pay rent. He doesn't have enough money to put gas in his car. He has $50 left to his name. And he says, what in the world am I going to do? What am I going to do with $50? He said, forget it. I just want to be human for a few minutes. And he goes down the street to a restaurant. Again, he couldn't drive because he had no gas in his car and couldn't afford any gas. But he goes down the street to a restaurant, and he sits down. He orders some food, and he starts eating. Again, drowning in his own sorrow. And all of a sudden, he sees a lady, a middle-aged lady. I don't know, maybe in her, definitely had the grandmother look to her, and a young boy, couldn't have been 9, 10 years old, who was with her. Clearly a grandmother and a grandson. And the grandson was so proud of himself, taking his grandma out for a date. He was wearing his finest clothes. When they brought him to the table, he walked over and he helped his grandmother sit down. He helped her put the napkin in his lap. He handed her a menu. He clearly had so much pride in being able to take his grandmother out on a date. And this man watching said, wow, look at that. That's beautiful. What would that kid feel like if not only could he be the one who's, theoretically taking his grandmother out, but what if he could pay the bill as well? What if he could pay for the meal with his grandmother? And he walks over, I guess he'd already paid for his meal or whatever, he hadn't ordered yet, but he walks over and takes the last money that he had and he hands it to the young boy and says, here, take your lady out for lunch. And the kid started beaming because here he was so proud of himself taking his mother or his grandmother out for lunch, and now he could even pay for the meal because this kindness from this man. The kid was beaming with excitement from ear to ear, and that man walked out of the restaurant a changed man. He said, I don't know how I'm going to do it, but somehow I'm going to pick myself up from this situation and I'm going to improve. And that man started a business and found a mentor and started following his mentor and started slowly but surely growing and becoming a little bit better, putting things together, starting to rebuild his life. And before he knew it, he had a very successful business that was spreading across the country, spreading across the world. And today that man has helped literally tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, I think millions of people. And his name is Tony Robbins. Yes, the Tony Robbins, big Tony Robbins. That's how he said he got his start in the helping profession that he's involved in, the motivational profession, is that day when he took the last $50 that he had and he hands it to that kid and an act of tremendous kindness. And that's the concept we're talking about of Venusnu. So now I want to, pick on some people. Before I pick on people specifically, I'll see if anyone wants to volunteer. You can raise your hand. You can turn your screen back on. You can type in the chat box. I want you to tell me an example of a chesed that was done for you, or you can tell an example of a chesed you did for somebody else, either the recipient of a kindness, or the recipient or the giver of the kindness. I want you to tell the story about how you saw that this act of kindness changed someone's life. So who are we going to pick on here? Well, I'm going to have to pick on someone then. And I know somebody here has a great story, and he can choose to ignore me because his camera's not on, but Gary Yaris, I know that you have a great story of how you got started in the real estate business with some people here in Cleveland. And it was through an act of kindness that you did. So I want you to tell that story for us, if you don't mind.
Well, you hear me? Am I on?
You're on.
All right. What can I tell you? I mean, I came to Miami to work for a big company. I came to work for Pepsi-Cola. And after a couple of years, decided I really wanted to be an entrepreneur. Problem is, everybody I knew was in Cleveland, and my family was in Cleveland, and there was nobody down here that I knew. And how do you do this? How do you go into business? How do you start something when you don't know anybody other than people that work at the Pepsi plant? And thank God, there were 2 or 3 people in my life that I met, and they became my mentors. I went to them. I had no clue. And they opened their offices, they opened their doors, they opened their homes, and it made all the difference in my refocusing my life. And, I remember them all so well. They're all now sadly resting in peace. But when I go through my life today, I want to be that kind of mentor to those around me. And I try to do that all the time. I spend about a quarter of my time mentoring younger people. And to me, it's the greatest joy, because not the joy it gives me, but the joy it gives them in being successful. So anyway, that's my story. It's reaching out and asking. And when I was in need, they came to me and offered their hearts and their minds. And now I want to continue to do the same thing.
Beautiful, beautiful. And, you know, Gary, you reminded me of something that I've been a beneficiary of, and that is a dear friend of mine here in Cleveland who I believe you know. That's Andy Lefkowitz.
So, sure.
Right. So it's also an entrepreneur of note, of success. Excuse me. And Andy told me the story about how he got his start as an entrepreneur. He got his start in business, and it wasn't that dissimilar than yours. In other words, he wasn't raised with means per se, but his parents were always very friendly with a lot of the great philanthropists here of Cleveland. And you know the names as well as I do. Yep. I believe you're related to some of them. You know, the Ratner family. Albert Ratner was a good friend of his father's, and others like that. And when he wanted to start his first business, he went to them, and they loaned him the money, and he got his start. And he became very successful in his first business. He sold that, started another business, and now what he does is, again, he spends countless hours with me and with others trying to mentor us on how we can be better in our vocation, in our fields, to be just a little bit better. And also, as a step to pay it forward, he went and started a girls' school that my daughter goes to. So,
oh wow,
of just the mentorship, the giving of your time to others. You know, just how as you said, quite often, yes, it's very helpful to them, but often more than not, it's you get more out of it than they get from that feeling. So,
and Andy Lefkowitz, by the way, Andy Lefkowitz and I are peers, and I knew him in the very beginning when we all had bupkis and we were trying to make things happen, and you know, thank God, hard work, nice connections, Hashem's help, and persistency. Anyway. It's a great story. And you, next time you see Andy, give him a hug for me.
We'll do. And, you know, just remind me of one more story before we have any volunteers. And again, I'm going to have to pick on people if we don't have volunteers. But my wife's actually she just texted me one I have to I'll get to, but one that popped in my mind first. I would pick on my father and call on him right now, but I'm going to tell the story instead because he might have to me if I do it. But I want to tell you a story about how when my father was deployed to Vietnam. Now, my father is, you might not think he's old enough to have fought in Vietnam, but he is. He's older than he looks. And when he was I believe a sophomore in college, so he went to the amazing, one of the best schools in the history of the world, none other than the Georgia Institute of Technology, aka Georgia Tech. And at Georgia Tech in those days, there was mandatory ROTC, mandatory ROTC. Yeah. You had to do it for your freshman, sophomore year in college. And so that's what my father did. Now, as his sophomore year was ending, that was already, after this little conflict that became known as the Vietnam War was starting to flare up. And my father said, okay, 1 second. Here I am. I'm whatever it is, 20 years old, 21 years old, 19, however old he was at that point, 19, 20. I forgot. He was a sophomore in college. He was only 14, right? He was very precocious. And he said, there's probably a pretty good chance they're starting a draft that I could get drafted into this thing. Well, if I get drafted, I go in as a private. But if I do 2 more years of ROTC, then I enter the Army. I volunteered to enter the Army. I'll have to be deployed somewhere, but I'll enter as an officer. And I'd much rather go in as a lieutenant than to go in as a private, as an enlisted man. So that's what he did. He did 2 more years of ROTC. And I think it was a month or two after marrying my mother, he was off to Vietnam to fight in the Vietnam War. My father, being the brilliant Georgia Tech engineer that he is, was trained in something called Signal Corps. Now, what Signal Corps is the people who set up the communications essentially on the line of scrimmage of war. So when the bombs are still flying, the guns are still shooting, when still a war zone, still very dangerous, that's when Signal Corps shows up to start to install your communications. Now, that's obviously a very dangerous job, and that's what my father was trained in, and that's what he thought he was going to be doing in Vietnam, and that was what he anticipated. Now, when my father landed in Vietnam, they used to do something. I don't know if they do this still with deployed soldiers, but they have you fill out a dream sheet. That means if you could have any position in the, any position in your tour of duty that, you write down what it would be. And, it's really, in many ways, is a psychological game, because if you're trained for something, it doesn't matter what you write down, you're going to end up doing what you're trained for. And that was the case with my father. He knew that he didn't have much of a chance of getting what was on his dream sheet because he was a highly trained Signal Corps officer. Nonetheless, he wrote down that he wanted to be in Saigon Support Command. Now, Saigon Support Command was a job for a quartermaster, and my father was a second-star lieutenant. But that's what he wrote down. Now, what was my father's thought process? He said that the whole leadership of the American Army lived in Saigon. So it must be that in the whole of Vietnam, that Saigon was the safest place to be, and therefore he wanted to be stationed in Saigon. Okay, my father fills a dream sheet, doesn't think much of it, doesn't think anything's going to happen. He gets his bags, he starts walking towards the, wherever he needed to go. All of a sudden he hears somebody say, "Where's Lieutenant Landis? Where's Lieutenant Landis?" And my father's thinking, I just got here. I couldn't have messed up. Well, yeah, like what's going on over here? And so my father says, "Yeah, I'm Lieutenant Landis." And a little pencil pusher comes up and he's holding a sheet of papers. It says, "Lieutenant Landis, it says here on your dream sheet, on your paperwork, that you're a Georgia Tech graduate. I also went to Georgia Tech." I said, "Wow, that's amazing." And the young man says to my father, he says, "Did you pledge a fraternity?" My father said, "Well, I was in AE Pi," which we all know AE Pi is I think now the last traditional Jewish fraternity. At that point, it was one of several, but it's a traditional Jewish fraternity. So my father saying that he went to AE Pi, he was also basically saying, boom, I'm Jewish, right? And the man responds to me, said, "Oh, well, I pledged ZBT, but I ended up not, or I rushed ZBT, but I ended up not pledging." Which again, ZBT at that point was a traditional Jewish fraternity at Georgia Tech. Which told my father that this guy was Jewish. And the guy looks on the sheet and he says, says here you want to be in Saigon Support Command. And my father said, "I just want to be anywhere, in Saigon to be safe." And the man says, "Let me see what I can do." And a few days later, my father gets his orders and he shows up with his orders to his ranking officer to Saigon Support Command. He gives over the orders and the ranking officer was looking at him and saying, "Why in the world are they sending me a second-star lieutenant for a quartermaster's position?" My father thinks to himself, "I know why." So that's an amazing case of just a chesed, like really what we call chesed shel emes. My father doesn't know the man's name. He never saw him again. And I told my father, I know the guy's name. The guy's name is Eliyahu HaNavi, is Elijah the prophet. There's a concept, right? There's a concept that when the Jewish people are in need of salvation, in need of a chesed, in need of a kindness, and there's no one there to provide it, then the prophet Elijah shows up to do that kindness for us. So I always tell my father that was his one encounter with none other than Eliyahu HaNavi, than Elijah the prophet. And through that encounter, through that kindness done to him, my father, thank God, survived the war, and we're here to talk about it. He and my mother are here on the class tonight. So
beautiful.
Example of an amazing kindness. Dad, did I get all the details right? Yeah. Okay. I was never going to get it right. Anyhow, so let's turn back to our crowd. Anyone? Moshe, Marla, Dina. I'm just looking at the names here because you guys don't have your cameras on. Anyone have a story of a kindness, a chesed, either that you experienced, that you did yourself, that you're a beneficiary of, that you would like to share? Okay, so I got two more, and then after that we're gonna have to end the program. So if no one else chimes in, so my wife reminded me that her grandmother. Oh, we got Mindy. Let's go to Mindy Garfunkel. By the way, I knew Mindy was going to volunteer because she's married to a Georgia boy. So that's great. So hi, Mindy. How are you? It's so good to see you. By the way, my daughter was with your cousin Hadassah for the Purim Suda. Sounds like they had a very nice time. Tell us your story. Go for it. The floor is yours.
It's a very small story, but I will never forget it. It's a good friend of mine, Esther Lubling. You might know her husband, Menachem Lubling. Amazing people. Anyways, I was pregnant last summer, and I went with her. We took our kids to a fun park, Rinky Dink Park, and they have like go-karts there and all kinds of like miniature golf. We took our kids there just for a day in I forgot where it is. And my little kids were too short to go on the go-karts, and I was pregnant, so I couldn't take them on the go-karts. And and you know how nauseating those go-karts are, like for any mom. And she took my kids, two of my kids, around on the go-karts. Like, I get emotional when I think about it, because she did such a chesed. My kids were so kvetchy. They were all complaining that all they wanted to do was go on the go-karts, and she went around 2 extra rounds to take my kids on those go-karts. I will never forget that chesed that you did.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. You know, my wife always tells a story about her grandmother, who, you know, we benevolently call Savta Schneer, and everyone called her Savta. That's just, she was the quintessential Savta. So Savta was, you know, my wife and I had very different experiences growing up, because she's the granddaughter of 4 survivors, all who survived World War II in Eastern Europe. I am the grandson of 1 survivor who left Eastern Europe before the war. So that means that those are very different life experiences. And I don't you know, I don't need to explain it. I think you can figure out how that leads to very, very different life experiences. But Savta Schneer was able to survive the war, literally running from town to town, posing as a non-Jew, because she had blonde hair, blue eyes, and that's how. And literally, as a young lady, as a teenager, I think she was 12, 13, maybe 14 years old, she went from town to town, just pretending that she was not Jewish. Every time she had to show papers, she either showed false papers or avoided showing papers, whatever it was, and like that, she survived the war. And when she came to America, she you know, had nothing, but literally, as she would say it. She would say that she had nothing but the sheet that she slept on. But when she said that in her Russian accent, it didn't sound like she was saying the word sheet. So anyhow, she would. That's how she said that she, you know, when she came to America. But she always tells the story about when she got to America, she connected with the Russian community, because she was from the, you know, I would say the former previous Soviet Union, whatever it was at that point, now the former Soviet Union, and she connected with the Russian community in Baltimore, and she literally got on her feet through the help of others in the Russian community. And she was given a loan to be able to, I believe, purchase a house and purchase a business. I forget all the details of the loan. Maybe my wife will chime in. And when she eventually got her business off the ground, her and Saba, my wife's grandfather, when they got their business off the ground, then you had the real influx of Russians coming in, and when the Iron Curtain started to crumble. I'm sorry, right? It started to crumble, and then it fell in the 80s and 90s, and she made it a point that because the Russian community in Baltimore helped her when she got there, that she was going to do whatever she possibly could to help out any Russian immigrant, and therefore she started her own free loan society. That she would co-sign on mortgages for Russians when they were buying their first homes. Because as you know, if you're coming to the country, you don't have a lot of means, don't have a credit history, don't have a lot in the bank, it's very hard to purchase a house. But she would always co-sign the loans on for numerous. We used to say that every Russian-owned house in Baltimore had Savta as a co-signer on the loan. And how did we find out this story? She was a very modest woman in this regard. We found out the story because when we bought our first home in Baltimore, anything we needed done, she had some Russian who would come and do it. It's like we got new chairs, we needed them upholstered, a Russian came to do it. A Russian man came to do it. We needed some electric work done, a Russian man came. We used to joke, it was like the Russian mafia. And we said, Savta, like, well, what's going on over here? And she eventually told us, she said, oh, well, I co-signed on their house when they came to Russia. I co-signed on their house when they came from Russia. And we realized that these were, the Venusnu, the people repaying the kindness that she had done for them, and that immigrant status of, it was originally done for her. She did it for others, and then they were paying back her kids. So that's really the circle of kindness, the circle of chesed, or the real circle of life, not the Disney one, but the real circle of life that we see. So I'm gonna, before I close with maybe one more story, one more thought, we'll open up one more time to the floor just to see if there's anyone who wants to raise their hand, wants to put in the chat box, anyone who has a story of a chesed, of a kindness that they would like to share. Anyone else before we wrap it up? Okay, so with no further ado, we're gonna close things off for tonight. And I just want to, like every night here on the 10 steps to the new you, I want you to really take to heart the power of chesed, the power of kindness. It's interesting that we talked 2 weeks ago about the concept of mitzvos. and how many people often interchange the term mitzvah with the term chesed. And chesed is a mitzvah, but not every mitzvah is a chesed, right? But I think there's a reason why colloquially as Jews, when we talk about the quintessential mitzvah, do a mitzvah, we're talking about a chesed. We're talking about a kindness, because our sages tell us that there are three national traits of the Jewish people, that we are rachmanim, we are a people of mercy, we are baishanim, we are a humble people, and we are gomlei chasadim, we are doers of kindness. And that's what it means to be a Jew. That's what it means to be the Jewish people. We are doers of kindness. And you go to any Jewish community and you see all the kindness organizations, the federations, the Bikur Cholims, the Chesed centers. You see that we are the second most philanthropic people in America after the Mormons, because hey, it takes a lot of philanthropy to support all those wives. But we are a people who does Chesed. We are a people of kindness. So let's make a commitment tonight to together work on this concept of chesed, to work on this concept of doing it, to work on this concept of helping others, and more importantly, as Rabbi Krohn said, thinking about others, because it all starts with thinking about others. Because if you just give a little bit of thought to people who are in need, before you know it, you'll see that there's so much you can do and how so little goes so far. So I want to thank you all for coming tonight. Next week, we will have the topic of faith. And we'll be joined by another one of my mentors, not only another one of my mentors, one of my first mentors, my first rabbi in Atlanta, Rabbi Friedman. He'll be joining us next week for a discussion on faith, and I look forward to it. If you want to reach out to me during the week, please, by all means, email, Facebook, WhatsApp, whatever means you like. Please reach out. Love to hear from you. Love to hear your thoughts. And until then, have a great week and a great evening.
Thank you, Rabbi.